Chapter 1241. Yes. Naomi smiled and nodded before taking the seat opposite Mr. Roswald. He studied her and smiled. What a surprise. I didn't expect you to be so elegant, Miss Xavier. I thought. You thought what? Mr. Roswald chuckled and continued. After all, you don't look much like your mother described. Naomi nodded. Something crossed Mr. Roswald, and he picked up the menu. Do you want to eat something? Feel free to order anything you want. She was stumped for a moment before replying with a smile. No, thank you. I've already eaten. I came here only because you said you wanted to see me. I see. So, would you like something to drink? Mr. Roswald asked again. Unable to turn down his offer, Naomi ordered a cup of coffee. While he was having his meal, he asked about her work. Since Naomi worked in Seoul as well, she was familiar with it. After they had finished talking, Mr. Roswald seemed rather satisfied with her as he said, "It truly surprises me that you're very serious in your work. Do you have any plans after you get married? After I get married?" Naomi's eyelashes trembled, and she shook her head. Nope. I don't have any plans. Mr. Roswald frowned slightly. You don't have any after-marriage plans? Could it be that you still want to work after getting married? Why can't I continue to work after I get married? Naomi asked. Mr. Roswald was momentarily stunned. That's because people like you guys can't take care of your career and family at the same time. Besides, after you get married, you need to take care of the kids, right? Naomi was stumped. It took her quite a while before she came around to her senses and said, "What do you mean by people like us? Do we have to sacrifice our career after getting married?" Mr. Roswald's smile froze, and his face turned solemn. Miss Xavier, so are you saying that you're going to choose your career over your family and kids? As if her thought amused him, he continued. I'm an engineer with a monthly salary of $15,000. I can support my whole family. I don't care how much my wife earns. I just want my wife to concentrate on her duties in the future. Naomi looked at him silently. Mr. Roswald picked up a glass of water and took a sip. After that, he decided to go into the main point. In fact, I've run a background check on your family, Miss Xavier. Both your parents are teachers, and although your family is fairly well off, you're far from being affluent. I'm the only son in my family, and my father passed away at an early age. My mother is the manager of a well-known company. I currently have 3 properties in my name and also have a car. You don't have to work so hard anymore after we get married, Miss Xavier. Besides, becoming a housewife and taking care of the children is easier than going to work, right? I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to be good to my mother and help me to take care of my family. That's all. After a short while of silence, Naomi lifted her head to look at him. So, you want your wife to give up on her career after marrying you and having children? Mr. Roswald was stunned. What? Not everyone has to abandon their career after they get married. It's a matter of choice. It isn't a must. Only if a person loves you will they marry you and help you to take care of your family. We've just met, and you're asking me to leave my work after marrying you. Are you looking for a wife or a babysitter? Mr. Roswald looked at her incredulously. He did not know whether he should be laughing or be angry at her. Miss Xavier, you aren't young anymore. It's true that you're pretty and fit the criteria for my choice of spouse. However, as time passes, you'll get older, and your beauty will wilt away. Do you think you still have the luxury of picking for the man you like? Naomi gripped the cup of coffee tightly, but she did not say anything in return. Mr. Roswald continued patiently. Besides, I'm a decent man with a good family background. If you marry me, your living conditions will improve significantly. I'll also take care of your parents after we get married. As for our relationship, Chapter 1242. Mr. Roswald stretched his hand and caressed the back of her hand. Naomi was stunned and frowned while he continued. I'm sure it'll work out anyway. I need a decent and wise wife like you, Miss Xavier. Naomi suddenly pulled her hand out and said, I'm sorry, but I already have someone I like. Mr. Roswell's expression changed, and he pulled her hand away. You have a man you like? So? What's the big deal? Are you guys dating? Are you married? If your parents know about your relationship, will they approve of it? Naomi was startled. She tried to pull her hand out of his grip, but to no avail. Her face turned grim as she warned, Mr. Roswell, please let go of my hand. Miss Xavier, I really like you. I liked you from the first moment I saw you. Mr. Roswell pulled her hand and landed a kiss on it, causing goosebumps to erupt over her skin. Naomi felt disgusted and pulled her hand out of his grip. She rose to her feet and said, please mind your manners, Mr. Roswell. The rest of the guests in the restaurant turned their heads and looked at them. Mr. Roswell leaned against the back of the chair and smiled sarcastically, what's the matter? Are you looking down at me? Lucy Xavier, do you think you can get everything your way just because you're pretty? If not for your pretty face, do you think you can get attention from other men because of your meager salary? I know. What do you want? You want to marry a rich man, isn't it? Ha, what a dreamer. All of you people are the same. You want nothing but gold and money. You think you're pretty, so you can get everything your way? You're not competent and can't earn enough money yourself, so you demand a massive bride price, yet you don't want to help your husband to take care of his family, and you want him to take care of you instead like some sort of high-priced doll. So, why do we even have to get married? The words that spilled out of his mouth were obnoxious, and the voices of the people around them were getting louder and louder. Naomi clenched her fists tightly. Although she knew he was not insulting her, she still felt humiliated because he was talking about Lucy. She picked up the cup of water on the table and splashed it on him. Mr. Roswell was infuriated by her action, so he shot up from his seat and shouted, how dare you splash water on me, you crazy woman. He lifted up his arm in an attempt to give her a slap. Naomi just stood there and looked as his hand came at her without batting an eye. Just when his hand was about to land on her cheek, he was kicked back to the seat by someone. A man's hand came out of nowhere and pulled Naomi, who still couldn't come around to her senses, into his arms and brought her away. You. Just when Mr. Roswell stood up and shouted, a bodyguard stood in front of him and pushed him back to his seat. Do you have a death wish? Do you know who she's? She's the daughter of Mr. Topaz, the owner of Eastwood Enterprise. She's the daughter of Mr. Topaz? Mr. Roswell was stunned. Isn't she Lucy Xavier? In the corridor, Naomi could barely keep up with his speed. While she was struggling, she said, Mr. Boucher, please walk slower. Francisco brought her to the emergency exit. Before she could say anything, he clasped his hand on her chin and kissed her. Naomi's pupils constricted, her heart raced into a gallop, and she tightened her hand on his chest slightly. This kiss was different from the kiss the previous time. He pried through her teeth, and she felt suffocated. Naomi whimpered, and it took a few moments for him to leave her lips. Looking at Naomi, whose face was red and breathing heavily, Francisco lifted his hand to rub her head and turned his face sideways. Now, you can't join any blind dates in the future. Naomi was stunned. Why? You still want to have a date with other men after kissing me? Francisco looked at her. What am I to you then? It took Naomi a few seconds before she could regain her senses. Her eyelashes trembled, and she mumbled, what are you talking about? Aren't you the one who? So, what is our relationship now? He lifted her chin and asked, what do you think? Chapter 1243. Naomi was momentarily stunned. Her eyelashes were trembling as she said, I have no idea either. I don't know what our relationship is right now. Besides, you don't take our relationship seriously, do you? Although I've never been in a relationship before, I know kissing between men and women represents the intimacy of a relationship. But we're not that kind of relationship. Well, maybe for you, we are not. Francisco did not know whether he should be laughing or be angry right now. He stood as stiff as a ramrod in front of her and asked, "So, you think that the thing between us is just a game for me? Is there a difference?" Naomi's eyes turned red, looking just like a rabbit that had just gotten bullied. "Yes, it is." Francisco placed his hand on the wall, beside her, as he leaned closer. "If this were just a game for me, I wouldn't kiss you. I'd just have sex with you." Naomi was so terrified that she froze in place. She looked at him fixedly as he went even closer to her. A devilish grin tugged at the corner of his lips as he whispered into her ear, "You know what? There's no need for a man to put in much effort if he just wants to have fun with a woman. He just needs to let his desire loose. For men, desire and affection can be separated, and I remember I have told you before not to think too highly of men, especially the ones like me." He withdrew his arm and turned around. "Mr. Topaz protects you well. You have not experienced the world yet, and there are all kinds of people in this world who are good at disguising themselves with masks. You said you believe in me, but you don't know me well. I'm not as good as you think, and I'm sure you know how bad my reputation is. My father used to be a playboy who cheated on his wife, and I, too, inherited his behavior. At the age of 17, I indulged in a hedonistic lifestyle, and women were like clothes to me. It's my grandfather who sent me for training in a closed environment that I turned a new leaf. However, it's true that I played with women's feelings." When he finished speaking, he turned around and looked at Naomi, whose face was written with surprise. "I was set up by the Hannigan daughter once, so I hate scheming women. Of course, this is what I deserve. I don't really understand why an innocent and ignorant woman like you would like a man like me. It's terrible." Naomi stood and looked at him silently. Even though he had told her every bad thing he had done in the past, her heart did not waver. After a short while, she looked at him and said, "I don't care." He was stunned. Naomi took a deep breath and added, "I don't care about your past. Even though everyone is telling me how bad you are, I still like you." She lowered her head and clenched her hands together. "You can reject me, but you can't doubt my feelings for you." Francisco's heart skipped a beat, and he set his jaw tightly. "Are you sure you want to be my girlfriend even if our future might not turn out as you expected?" She smiled, and tears fell from her eyes. "Never try, never know. Even if the future isn't." He stretched his arms and pulled her into his embrace, stunning her. Her tears rolled in her eyes, and Francisco pressed on. "Are you sure you won't regret it?" Naomi wrapped her arms around him and buried her face into his chest. "No, I won't regret it," she sobbed. Francisco lifted her face and realized that she was crying. He wiped the tears off her face with his finger and lowered his head to kiss her. She closed her eyes and tried her best to respond to the kiss. After a long while, both of them moved away from each other. Francisco looked at her reddened nose and chuckled. "You look really like a rabbit." He lifted his hand to tousle her hair and asked, "When are you free?" "Why do you ask?" Naomi asked. Francisco hugged her, and they emerged from the emergency exit. "Let's go on a date." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. He's asking me for a date? Does this mean that we're officially dating now? Chapter 1244. When Naomi did not reply, Francisco cocked his head to look at her. "You don't want to go on a date with me?" "Of course, I want to go on a date with you." Naomi froze for a moment and asked, "Are we in a relationship now?" Francisco tightened his grip and pulled her closer into his arms. "Really? This is the question you have for me? You really are more ignorant than I thought you were." Naomi looked at him, and a smile appeared on her face. The next day, at Seoul. "Thank you for yesterday, Naomi. My mom told me that guy called her and said we were not suitable. He even apologized to my mom, and my mom was shocked," Lucy said, expressing her gratitude to Naomi. Naomi replied with a smile on her face, "It's fine. I should thank you instead." "Thank me?" Lucy was confused. Why are you thanking me? Naomi lowered her head. She had been feeling different since yesterday. Looking at the smile on Naomi's face, Lucy said, "Look at you, grinning like a Cheshire cat. You aren't in love, are you?" Naomi's face flushed with embarrassment when she heard what Lucy said. Seeing her reaction, Lucy knew she had guessed it right and asked, "Seriously?" Naomi nodded. Piqued by her curiosity, Lucy went closer and asked, "Who is it?" Naomi lowered her head and replied, "It's someone you know." Lucy fell into contemplation for a moment before looking at her incredulously. "You're not talking about Mr. Boucher, are you?" When she saw the expression on Naomi's face, she was stunned. "Seriously? You're dating him?" Naomi replied with a smile, "Yeah, who else could it be if not him? What do you really like about him? Aren't you worried about?" Even though Lucy did not finish her sentence, Naomi knew what she wanted to say. She looked at her and said seriously, "I don't care about his past. I just know that I like him for how he's now. As for what I like about him, I can't really tell. Maybe I think he's a nice person." Lucy did not want to say anything anymore upon seeing how resolute Naomi was. "All right then. What's done cannot be undone. Congratulations." After Lucy left, Naomi received a text message from Francisco, and her face broke into a smile. In the afternoon, Naomi came to the car park. Francisco was waiting for her in front of his car. He was wearing a blue and gray double-breasted trench coat jacket that fit him like a glove, and it made him stand out from other people. Naomi ran toward him. She tripped herself and fell right into his arms. Francisco grabbed her into his embrace and chuckled. "You don't have to be so excited when you see me." She felt embarrassed. She pulled herself out of his arms and stood straight. Francisco took a box of snacks out of the car and handed it to her. "You haven't had lunch yet, right? Here, it's for you." Naomi took over the box of snacks and lifted her head to look at him. "Are you here to deliver lunch for me?" "Yeah," he replied matter-of-factly. "I'm worried that you'll get hungry, and this is what I should do as your boyfriend as well." Naomi smiled and replied, "Thank you." Francisco tousled her hair and continued. "I have to go back to the prosecutor's office. I may not be able to come to see you in the next 2 days, but if you miss me, you can call me." After that, he kissed her forehead. Naomi pressed her lips and nodded obediently. Both of them did not know that someone was watching them from a car not far away. Naomi watched as Francisco got into the car and drove away. She looked at the box of snacks in her hand, and just when she turned around, she saw her father coming out of his car and was stunned. She walked over to him and asked, "What brought you here today, Dad?" Anthony looked in the direction where the car had disappeared with a frown. "I heard you're still at Seoul, so I wanted to pay you a visit." Chapter 1245. Naomi pressed her lips thin. Anthony looked at the box of snacks in her hand and frowned deeply. "Nellie, is that Francisco?" Naomi's heart skipped a beat, and she became nervous. However, she did not dare to hide it from her father and confessed everything. "Yeah. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have told you earlier." "When did it start?" "Yesterday." "That's not what I'm asking. I want to know when you two started seeing each other." Anthony frowned. "About a month ago," she replied. "Dad, you told me that you won't interfere with my relationship. I like him very much." Anthony took a deep breath and said seriously, "Yes, I did tell you before that I wouldn't interfere with your relationship, but it depends on who you're seeing. Nellie, Francisco isn't suitable for you." "Dad, I know he has a bad reputation, but I don't care about his past," Naomi replied. This was the first time she went against her father. Upon realizing how much his daughter liked Francisco, Anthony's face turned grim. "Nellie, this isn't as simple as you think. A man like Francisco isn't someone you can handle. This is for your own good." Naomi could not understand it at all. "I don't understand." You think he's still a bad guy just because he had a bad reputation in the past? Nellie. Dad, I'm an adult. I can differentiate good from bad. He isn't as bad as we think he was. Naomi pulled his hand. Dad, please give us some time. We'll prove it to you. I have faith in him. Anthony did not say anything, but he was worried. Putting aside what kind of a man Francisco used to be, everyone in the city knew about his scandalous past. Francisco might have become a prosecutor because of his own effort, but Anthony did not dare to risk his daughter's future. Besides, his daughter had been cut off from the outside world ever since she fell into a coma, so she was gullible. She was his only daughter, so he must not let down his guard. It seemed to him that he had to introduce his daughter to better men who she could depend on. In the evening, at the Blue Bay Villa, Maisie was changing her shoes in the hallway. When she walked into the living room, she saw that Nolan was making dinner in the kitchen. She threw her purse on the couch and walked up to him. When she saw what kind of food he was making, she said in surprise, "You're making buffalo chicken wings?" He chuckled deeply and replied, "I saw you like this the day of our outing, so I tried to make some." Maisie hugged him from the back and pressed her cheek on his back. "I like everything you make." Nolan cocked his head to look at her and said, "Go wash your hands. Dinner is ready." She walked to the table and sat down. After Nolan had served all the food, Maisie hurriedly took a piece of the buffalo chicken wings into her plate. Nolan took off the apron and looked at her. "What does it taste like?" Maisie lifted her head and nodded. "It's even tastier than the one my cousin made." After that, she picked one up and sent it to Nolan's mouth. When Nolan was tasting the chicken wing, she giggled and said, "Right?" "Yeah," he replied faintly. "When you eat something you made yourself, it tastes just average." Maze pouted, "Just average?" His cooking skills are comparable to those of a five-star hotel chef. He's such a humble brag. Maisie blinked and said, "What about I make it for you next time?" Chapter 1246. Nolan took a bowl, fetched himself some soup, and laughed out loud. "I don't expect you to cook anymore. You're the one who's going to make money and feed me." Maisie took the soup bowl and chuckled. "It's very expensive to feed a CEO." Nolan was about to say something when his cell phone rang. He narrowed his eyes and answered the call when he saw the caller ID. "What's the matter?" The other party said something to him through the call, and he responded with a light hum. "I'll be there tonight." When the call ended, Maisie looked at him. "What's wrong?" Nolan's lips curled slightly. "There's a gathering tonight, and your classmate will also be there." Maisie knew who he was talking about and clicked her tongue. "My classmate? Isn't he your cousin too?" Nolan became even more amused. "He's also your cousin." As night fell, the city became decorated with lights. The VIP room number 1 of the hotel's restaurant was filled with well-known figures in the field. As the Clifford expanded their cross-strait business, it was only natural for veteran directors and CEOs in the industry to come and join in. Apart from Nolan, Anthony was also invited. Nolan and Jackie were cousins, and since this matter had not been made public, almost no one knew about it. Everyone thought that he was there out of courtesy. Nolan drank with several directors who came to him and proposed a toast. He then lifted his head and brought the wine glass to his lips, but before he took a sip out of the glass, he saw Anthony appear with his daughter, Naomi. Naomi came with her father, and she did not understand the reason her father would bring her. It was not until she entered the private room that she realized that not only her, but several daughters of the other CEOs and directors were also present. Anthony walked toward Nolan, who smiled and nodded at him. "Uncle Topaz, you've come too." "Yeah, I brought Naomi over to let her get in touch with the circle more. After all, she'll be in touch with them more frequently in the future," Anthony said with a smile. Naomi only nodded at Nolan and greeted him politely. At this time, a director called Anthony over, so he turned around, told Naomi to wait for him, and went away. Because she was unfamiliar with anyone present, Naomi looked around and thought that Maisie would also be there, but unfortunately she was not. Nolan put down the wine glass and saw Naomi looking for someone. Z didn't come with me. Are you looking for her? Naomi was stunned for a split second. She then waved her hand and smiled. That's fine. There's no need to bother her. Nolan explained lightly, you're Mr. Topaz's daughter. Those people won't do anything to you, so don't worry. Several directors' daughters looked in their direction and were surprised by what they saw. Since his marriage, Mr. Goldman has always been a great husband who loves and pampers his wife to the max, and he's never taken the initiative to talk to other women. Yet, he's having a conversation with the daughter of the owner of Eastwood Enterprise? That's unbelievable. A voice came from behind. I thought you wouldn't even show up. I didn't expect you to do me this honor. Naomi turned her head in doubt, and the elegant and handsome man with gold-rimmed glasses who was approaching them was the man who had been playing the piano that night. Nolan looked at Jackie, who was coming over with a lukewarm attitude. I'll still have to save my cousin some face. When Jackie heard the word cousin, the smile on his face stiffened slightly. His gaze then landed on Naomi's face, and he was astonished. Miss, you look very familiar. Have we met somewhere else? She nodded politely. Mr. Pianist. Oh yeah, it turns out to be you. Jackie picked up the wine glass on the table and smiled. I didn't expect to see you again. Naomi smiled. At that moment, Anthony walked over with several veteran directors, and they introduced Jackie to him. This is the grandson of Elder Master Clifford from Octavia, Mr. Jackie Clifford, Chapter 1247. It turns out to be Mr. Clifford. I've heard so much about you. Anthony raised his glass and proposed a toast. Jackie raised his glass and said with a smile, I've also heard a lot about you, Mr. Topaz. Especially about your overseas collaboration in the Persian Gulf project. Anthony was astounded and smiled. The success of the Persian Gulf project is the joint effort between the other investors and me. They're the ones who should get most of the credits when compared to me. Jackie slowly finished the red wine. Mr. Topaz, you're being too modest. By the way, do you know my daughter? Anthony took a glance at Naomi. He had seen Jackie talking to his daughter a few seconds ago. Jackie paused for a second. Is this young lady your daughter? He responded, yes, my daughter rarely attends such occasions, so I've been bringing her along to get her to adapt to them recently. I see. Jackie explained calmly, we just met at the dinner banquet the other day. Listening to the conversation between her father and Jackie, Naomi lowered her gaze and did not utter a single word from beginning to end. She had always been a sensitive lady and could sense that her father wanted her to get in touch with all these wealthy men and women. As for his intention, she pursed her lips tightly. Dad still can't let go of his prejudice against Francisco. Nolan sipped his wine slowly as he glanced at this scene thoughtfully. Maisie sent him a text message at this moment, asking him not to drink too much wine and that she had prepared supper and was waiting for him to go home. The corners of his lips rose slightly. My wife is waiting for me at home, and I really wish to go home immediately. These events are so annoying. Mr. Goldman. Naomi walked up to him and asked cautiously, can I occupy a few minutes of your time? Nolan and Naomi came out to the corridor. Knowing that she had a favor to ask, Nolan immediately opened his mouth. Just give it to me, Miss Topaz. Naomi lowered her head. I know that you're quite close to my father, so I want to ask you to help persuade my father and get him to let go of his prejudice against Francisco. Nolan squinted slightly. He had probably guessed Anthony's purpose for bringing his daughter to the banquet tonight. What makes you think I can convince Mr. Topaz? I think my father will accept your opinion to a certain extent. She bit her lip. No matter how she communicated with her father, trying to explain the whole thing to him, her father obviously would not listen to her. She did not want to ruin her relationship with her father, nor did she want to leave Francisco. Mr. Topaz is definitely a good father. Nolan frowned. After having children, he could somewhat understand the feeling of being a father. Miss Topaz, you shouldn't rely on others if you want to convince your father. Naomi was stunned for a moment. Nolan's expression was unchanged. If you want your father to let go of his prejudice against Francisco, the problem can't be solved by relying on someone else's advice. The problem has to be solved by the two of you, and only the two of you. Naomi pursed her lips and clenched her hands tightly. Before going back into the room, Nolan said, "Perhaps, this is the test that's sitting right in between the two of you." She froze in place. Returning to the private room, Anthony summoned Naomi with a smile. "Nellie, Mr. Clifford mentioned about you just now, saying that you played the piano well the last time you two met, so why not go up the stage and have another go with Mr. Clifford?" Naomi's gaze landed on the piano that was placed on the stage, and Jackie had already sat right next to it. Anthony pushed her over. "Go and give it a try." Jackie seemed to be waiting for her, and when he saw Naomi coming onto the stage, he grinned. "Miss Topaz, all you need to do is assist me from the side." Naomi nodded. She sat down next to Jackie, and they played Pachelbel's Canon in D major with four hands. Everyone present looked at their collaboration and praised them. These two kids seemed to be a good match. Chapter 1248. It's no wonder that Mr. Topaz brought his daughter over tonight. This seems to be his intention. Listening to the comments of the people around him, Anthony smiled without saying a word. I do hope that Naomi will get into too much contact with an excellent man like Jackie. At 9 p.m. Nolan had left the banquet and returned to the Blue Bay Villa. Maisie was dumbfounded when she saw him coming back so early. "Why did you come back so soon?" Nolan undid his tie and took off his jacket. "The dinner was boring, so I wanted to come home earlier to accompany my wife." Maisie sneered and took the jacket from him. "Why? Wasn't there a pretty woman at the dinner party?" He hugged Maisie from behind, buried his face in her hair, and smirked. "Other than you, other women are all meant to me." She turned around and pressed her finger against his lips. "You'd better watch out for that glib tongue of yours." He responded lightly with a hum, straightened his posture, and gently rolled up his sleeves. "I met Naomi at the banquet." Maisie was stunned and could not help but wonder. "Naomi is there too?" He walked to the couch, sat down, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Specifically, Anthony is the one who brought her there, probably with the intention of making a match out of Naomi and Jackie." Maisie was slightly startled. "Anthony wants to make a match out of Naomi and Jackie?" She thought of something and walked over. "Does Mr. Topaz not know about Naomi and Francisco?" "All these happened only because he knows." Nolan hugged her. "Naomi came to me and asked me to speak to her father about his prejudice against Francisco." Maisie looked at him and said nothing. He sounded serious and rigorous. "But it's a matter between the two of them. It's pointless to rely on others to speak to someone about his or her prejudice. They have to resolve it themselves." Maisie remained silent. What Nolan just said isn't wrong. Anthony's prejudice against Francisco is nothing more than the result of the scandals that Francisco had had in the past. Besides, Anthony only has one daughter, so he's always been very cautious in order to protect his daughter. He doesn't approve of Francisco only because he is worried, isn't he? Naomi fell into a coma due to an accident during her university years. After more than 10 years of being in a coma, she has been isolated from all sorts of social interactions and has never had any form of contact with any man. After regaining her consciousness, Anthony has been loving and protecting his daughter even more. He doesn't agree with the idea of Naomi being together with Francisco only because of the consideration of a father. Nolan took her to his thigh and sat her down. "What are you thinking about?" Maisie lifted her gaze to look at him and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'm thinking if our daughter were to fall for a boy you don't like in the future, would you do the same to them?" Nolan's own words choked him. He cleared his throat and looked away. It's too early to think about this now. Time flies, doesn't it? The kids will turn into adults in just a few more years, and then, Nolan had sealed her lips. We'll talk about it when the time comes. Maisie was at a loss for words. The next day, at Seoul. Naomi was still sitting alone in the staff restaurant, but she had no appetite. She kept staring at her phone from time to time as Francisco had not replied to the text message that she sent him last night. She did not raise her head until someone sat down across from her. She raised her head and was stunned instantly. Miss Vanderbilt? Maisie smiled and put down her tableware. Lucy has taken a leave of absence. I saw you're eating alone again, so I've come to accompany you. Naomi lowered her gaze and did not say anything. Seeing that Naomi was looking at the screen of her phone from time to time, Maisie could not help but ask, "Are you waiting for Francisco's message?" She was flustered again. Seeing her reaction, Maisie laughed. I know everything about you and Francisco. Actually, Francisco is quite a nice person. Chapter 1249. It was probably Naomi's first time listening to someone else praise Francisco. Naomi lifted her head and looked at Maisie. Miss Vanderbilt, do you think he's a good man too? I went to the training camp for more than half a month back in the day, and back then, Francisco was. Maisie stirred the soup in the bowl. Should I say unruly and very active? But he's indeed become a lot more mature now. Naomi pursed her lips. I didn't know him before, but I don't care what he was like before. Why do you like him? Maisie's words made Naomi think of the question that Francisco had asked her 3 times before this. She lowered her gaze. I don't know that either. I just think that he's a fine man. Is it because I saw his kind gesture at the hospital? Or is it because he saved me from certain embarrassment by paying for my coffee at the cafe? Or maybe it's because of that time when he helped me out when we rammed into the rear end of someone else's car and were almost scammed of our money? I don't even know the answer myself. Maisie supported her chin with one hand. If you really want to be together with him, I believe that even your father can't stop you. You two are facing difficulties because of your father's disapproval. So, you'll still have to face the things that you must face. You can even face them together. Naomi lowered her gaze and smiled. Mr. Goldman has told you. His grandfather didn't think highly of me back then either, but Nolan insisted. Maisie looked back at her past disdainfully. Nolan and I have gone through a lot of things just to get to where we are today, and that includes life and death. But after all that we've gone through, I've never regretted marrying him up until today. Naomi was astounded. After a while, she seemed to have understood something and said with a smile on her face, yes, I won't give up on us. At the same time, at the district's attorney's office, Francisco and his colleagues came out of the building and saw Anthony standing in front of a car. Francisco said something to the people next to him and walked toward Anthony. What brings you here, Mr. Topaz? Anthony glanced at him. I'm here for you. Francisco guessed it was probably because of this matter, so he nodded. Are you here because of Naomi? Yes, Anthony answered without hesitation and then added, I'm here to ask you to break up with my daughter. On his way back, Francisco recalled what Anthony had told him and tightened his grip on the steering wheel. I might as well tell you everything directly. Nellie is a simple and pure girl because she got into an accident at university, which caused her to fall into a coma for more than 10 years. Even when the hospital informed me that she could only be in a vegetative state and that the chances of her regaining consciousness were extremely slim, I did not give up on her. She had been isolated from the world for so long and had never been in contact with others from the outside world. The changes in the outside world are still fresh to her, so perhaps she likes you only because of her ignorance of the romantic relationship aspect of things. She might not care about your past, but I only have one daughter. Her mother abandoned her in under a month after giving birth to her. I'm the one who's gone through all the hardships to bring her up. So, I can't watch my daughter get abandoned again someday in the future, and I don't believe that you can provide her with a future. The ringtone of Francisco's cell phone interrupted his thoughts. He picked up the cell phone and took a glimpse at the caller ID. It was a call from Naomi. He hesitated for a few seconds and was about to answer, but when he shifted his gaze away from the phone screen, an oncoming car made him turn the steering wheel abruptly. Naomi stood in the corridor to make the call, and she was astonished as she stared at the screen in confusion when the call was hung up. When she tried to call him again, nobody was there to answer the call. Naomi put the phone down. He must be very busy now. Did I disturb him? Chapter 1250. Francisco called back after a few minutes, and she answered the call with a smile. Hello. After hearing something that came from the other end of the phone call, Naomi's expression changed slightly. At the hospital. Naomi rushed to the door of the ward. Besides Francisco, a middle-aged man was also standing in the ward, his father, Eugene. Francisco had a plaster cast on his left leg, and it seemed that there was nothing serious except his leg injury. He sat on the hospital bed and glanced at Naomi. Eugene also looked over and wondered. She's. Francisco replied indifferently, a friend. Since you're fine, then have a good rest. Eugene got up and left the ward. Naomi walked over to the hospital bed and stared at him. Are you okay? It's okay. It's just a flesh wound. Francisco gave off a faint smile. So, don't worry. Naomi lowered her head and bit her lower lip. I'm sorry, I called because I hadn't received your reply. I didn't know that my action would cause you to run into an accident. It's not your fault. You don't have to apologize. Francisco pulled the blanket up to his waist and leaned back on the pillow. Naomi, can I ask you something? She froze for a few seconds, then nodded. He smiled and asked, can you describe your feelings for me? Is it just as her father mentioned, she likes me only because of her ignorance? Naomi was stunned for a while. Can I describe my feelings for him? Thinking back to what Maisie had said to her, Naomi took a deep breath. My feelings for you are so strong that I want to be with you for the rest of my life. Francisco looked at her. She lowered her gaze, her eyes were filled with a hint of glee that she could not hide. It's also a feeling that I won't give up. Francisco's gaze was fixed on her. You won't give up even if everyone else doesn't like the fact that we're together? No. Naomi did not even hesitate, but she then thought of something, paused for a second or two, and said, as for my father. He's just a little prejudiced, but I'll make sure that he'll accept you in the future. Francisco covered his face with his palm and chuckled softly. You're so dumb. You obviously have so many better choices. Naomi lowered her gaze. Those might be better choices, but they're never going to be someone that I like. After a long while, he opened his mouth with difficulty. You should find someone who's better for you. I may not be suitable for you. Naomi's heart trembled. What are you talking about? He avoided her gaze and continued calmly. Let's just break up. Naomi froze in place. When Kennedy and Samantha, who arrived at the door, heard what they were talking about, they immediately hid behind the wall at the room's entrance. The atmosphere in the ward was dead silent as if it had cut off all the background and surrounding sounds. Naomi stood stiffly in place, staring at him in disbelief. Did you just say that we should break up? Yes. Francisco looked out the window with a gloomy expression. I can't provide you with a promising future, and I don't want to waste your time. Naomi's breathing became exceptionally labored, and her vision blurred as the tears rose. But why? Francisco lowered his tone a little. Do we need any reason to break up? Naomi's clenched fists trembled, and her lips turned pallid as if something had rolled over and crushed her heart. She felt devastated deep down. Don't you like me? Francisco clenched his hands that were resting under the blanket, but he did not let any emotion escape through his facial expression. Who in the world would appreciate a woman who reverses the courting process? A teardrop gushed down from the corner of her eye, and she still could not believe what she had just heard. Breaking up is just a lie, isn't it? There's no need for me to lie to you. Francisco looked at her with an indifferent expression. Naomi, I only got together with you only because I thought you were too pure and too easily fooled. You might not think I'm such a man, so I'm proving to you that I am. As such, we're done here.